Thanks everybody for coming. I'm Barton Levenson. I'm a local writer, former programmer, former scientist. And the book I'm selling today is The Celibate Succubus, which is a young adult religious fantasy. If there's anybody who doesn't know, a succubus is a sort of demon that goes after you by trying to seduce you, presumably if you're a guy or a gay female. There's a male equivalent, the incubus. And the whole concept originated during the High Middle Ages and may have been the result of something psychologists call the incubus dream. If you have gone a long time without sleep, you may have a nightmare in which you suddenly think you've woken up to find a big heavy creature sitting on your chest and glaring at you. Quite a nasty image. And the Jungians have a great time with declaring that a racial memory of predation, although you would think somebody that happened to wouldn't have been able to pass on that experience. He was dead shortly thereafter. But at any rate, I took the medieval succubus. I took the counterfactual proposition, suppose a demon could be saved, what would that be like? And decided to write about one. Here's a succubus named Delilah who renounces her place in hell, goes to work for the good guys. And that's my story. Does anybody have any questions? Or?
How did you get the idea of celibate? And why is that so ironic?
Well, because a succubus is a sex demon. It's out to seduce people. You know, there's nothing wrong with sex per se, even in Christian tradition, contrary to popular belief. But if a succubus is after you, it wants you to commit adultery, or fornication or perversion of some sort that's bad enough that it will turn you away from God.
How did it get to be celibate?
She's decided not to be a demon anymore. She's going to be a good guy. Doesn't happen in real life, I understand, but
basically the title was an oxymoron.
yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, that's what makes it so interesting.
Yeah.
It's eye-catching.
I may also have been thinking about the 70s fad books like The Sexuous Woman and The Celibate Succubus by C.
Is there a particular passage that you could read for us that would be representative of the
I can
book?
do that. I'll have a little come on here. Here's, should we do a short one or shall I do a full chapter?
Short.
Short, okay. Here's the preface. Delilah fled up the stairs with the men in business suits just behind her. The athletic men, still coming fast after 8 flights of stairs. Delilah had the body of a 16-year-old girl, busty and curvy with the seductive, dark-haired good looks of a Hollywood teen, but not an athlete. Nonetheless, she pulled ahead of her pursuers. Sit rep, crackled the plug in her ear. Please report the current situation. She spared no breath to answer. She had a healthy fear of the men behind her. At times in the past, she had felt pain so intense and so prolonged that it would have driven a normal human being insane. There would be even more if they caught her. But she didn't panic. It wasn't time to go all out yet. Despite her speed, which was as fast as any human being could climb stairs, she still wasn't going as fast as she could. She paced herself, breathing steadily. 12 floors. 16 floors. She began to lag. From the echoes behind her, one pursuer was very close, no more than a floor away. She turned her head just a bit to look down over the center of the stairwell. The blond guy with the crew cut looked straight at her, very calmly despite his panting. His pistol aimed at her face. Ignore the scenery, she told herself. Looking back had already cost her speed and distance. She turned and pumped her legs harder, but too late. Bang! Pain exploded in her back and blood blew out of her chest near the collarbone. The pain would have stopped a normal girl in her tracks, but Delilah ignored it. Through and through, she thought. Good. Better than if the bullet had lodged inside her. Delilah, what happened? The voice at rear plug asked. Don't you know a gunshot when you hear one, Steve, you moron? She thought. At the 22nd floor, blood soaking her blouse, she saw more bad news. Rooftop, no admittance, authorized personnel only. Delilah rammed the door with her shoulder at 20 miles per hour and banged through it, tearing the lock out of its metal housing. She leaped up the stairs, bashed through the penthouse door, and found herself on the roof of the airport Sheraton, 23 stories above Moon Township, Pennsylvania. It was a bright, clear summer day. Toy car traffic and ant-like pedestrians moved far below. No other buildings to jump to. No aircraft in sight. Pursuers behind her with torture and murder in mind. She stood on each heel to force her shoes off, pulled off her slacks, and tore off her blouse, leaving herself clad in underwear and socks. A thin gold band circled her neck. Like growing plants sped up by a time-lapse camera, immense black bat wings emerged from her back, and an arrowhead-tipped tail sprouted from her waist. She ran to the low wall around the building's edge, vaulted atop it, and leaped off into space.
You've already, I think, in the right there, partly touched on it, but I assume a succubus celibate, that still leaves her with a range of powers and sensibilities.
She's a demon.
Right.
She's materialized a human body to get around in, but it can do things a normal human being can't. She's immensely strong. She can fly. You know, normally she keeps the wings and the tail hidden. She can retract them into her body. But, you know, here's an emergency and she can fly. Only this is the start of big problems for her because she's going to be flying in plain sight of about 100 people, many of them with handheld phones that contain pictures.
Can she sense anything that we would not sense?
She has a very good sense of smell. Her intellect is much greater than a human being's. She can process very quickly. She can tell what a human being is thinking a lot of the time, not through telepathy, but simply through clues, what the person's voice is saying, what their face is doing.
Can she live without a man?
Yeah. See, I have it in here that the demons don't really enjoy sex, even the succubi and incubi. They have sex to damn people, not because they enjoy it. The devils here take a very Gnostic viewpoint. Spirit is good, matter is bad, and human sexuality is the most disgusting of all. Well, that was that Gnostic influence.
Excuse me.
But she's older than 16 in reality, right?
Well, in most of the books, she's ages 15 to 17, but she's always looked 16 from birth. Because a committee down in hell determined that that was the optimum age for seducing people.
Sorry, excuse me.
A 16-year-old, you know, who's good at what she's doing has a better chance of seducing a straight male or a gay female.
Okay, that's right.
Whether that's true or not, we don't know. There's wishful thinking down in hell as well as up here.
How did you come across Barking Dog Press?
That's a good question. Barking Rain Press,
Barking Rain, I'm sorry.
which are the people who put this out. The editor now is a lady named Sherry Gormley, and she was my editor on an earlier book of mine, I Will, for a company called Virtual Tales, which is now unfortunately out of business. But when Virtual Tales crashed, she went to Barking Rain Press.
Oh.
I wrote to her there. She read the manuscript and took it.
Cool. All right. Very good.
I'm very happy about that.
How do you get to the young people to advertise it and make it interesting to them?
That's a good question.
How about some high school?
I'm hoping to get some reviews of the book, especially on Amazon. Maybe I could talk to high schools. Maybe Catholic high schools would be interested. I'm a Protestant, as those who know me know, but for the purposes of the book, I took a Roman Catholic point of view. Since it's originally a Roman Catholic myth.
Barton, would a succubus, especially in this story, follow a deontological or a teleological worldview, and how did her view change throughout the book, if it did?
The ethics of hell are pretty much straightforward philosophy of power, and therefore consequentialist. You know, you do whatever you have to do to get the job done. Right or wrong doesn't matter. You know, as a very young succubus, she's trying to get out of a punishment and is telling somebody, "Oh, if we're really good," teacher immediately interrupts her to say, "Don't say good. That's meaningless. Say useful or productive or pleasing to our superiors." Mm-hmm. Good has no meaning.
And as I recall, having read this already through the World Rights, we critique it, there are scenes of Delilah, like flashbacks, and in hell, she's part of.
I have one whole chapter set in hell, and some
Okay.
brief scenes there. And of course I crib a great deal from Dante. Delilah is brought up and trained in Sergio Secundum, the Circle of Lust.
But all the demons there, they're not friends with each other. They're competing and so forth. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay.
I start off the book with a couple of quotes, and one of them is from C.S. Lewis, who, among other things, was a Milton scholar. And he says, yes, Milton has told us the devil with devil damned firm concord holds. But how? Certainly not by friendship. A being which can still love is not yet a devil. The devils, for the most part, with the exception of Delilah here, who's a bit of a freak, have lost all capacity to love. They are out for themselves and for themselves only. You know, they may occasionally form alliances for strategic reasons, but if they do, they're always looking for an excuse to slip the knife in.
Which writers have influenced you for this particular genre?
For fantasy and horror, well, of course, C.S. Lewis was a big influence. His Space trilogy, the depictions of hell in that influenced this quite a bit, I think. And of course, what he wrote about hell in his theological works. Tolkien was an influence, but not so much for this book, because this isn't Elves and Trolls, this is modern urban fantasy, for the most part. I was influenced a great deal, started thinking about succubi when I ran across one in the work of an author called Mike Carey, who wrote a horror novel called The Devil You Know in 2006. He has a portrayal of a succubus in there, but unlike this, which is toned down a bit for the young adult audience, his succubus is really nightmarish. She is scary. Mike Carey.
Carrie?
C-A-R-E.
Okay.
Yeah. And I can't recommend that book highly enough. The Devil You Know. He posits a world, or at least in England, where the supernatural has come to be accepted by everybody, and you can find ghosts and things flitting around London.
Can you tell us a bit about your writers group, how long you've been in it, and how it has helped you and influenced you?
Okay, yeah, the Pittsburgh World Rights was begun in 1993 by Mary Soon Lee, herself a fairly famous writer. She has about 50 published stories and a couple of published books now. I was present at the original meeting, as was Bill Hall on my left, and Elizabeth. And I've been with it pretty much ever since. Since 1993 would make it 20 years. And a lot of fairly famous writers have been through it. Tim Isaias, John DeChancy came to the first meeting, although not the ones after that. Kara Dulke was a member. Ann Cecil, Karen Bachman. Paul Melko was in it, yes, for a long time. Trying to remember who else. There were other people who were in it who were better known than Kurt Goldschliff.
What can you tell us about your process of writing?
I usually start with just a brief idea. A daydream, an imagined scene, something like that. And I just start writing the scene. You know, a lot of the times that'll fail. I never finish the story. But sometimes I get something out of it. Usually there's more than one influence on the book. For this one, a manga, Rosario and Vampire, was a big influence on me. Because one of the characters is a succubus, although mine is nothing like Kurono Kuromu in Rosario and Vampire. It's interesting that Japanese manga and anime often make a great deal of use of Christian tropes. Because the vast majority of Japanese are animists and not Christians, they're Shinto or Buddhist or both, they often really don't quite get the Christian concepts behind them. It's just stuff that looks neat to them, so they use it. You know, Kurono in Rosario and Vampire is described as being simply a dream demon, unquote. You know, there's not much talk about damnation or seduction, although seduction is certainly her mission. I recommend that manga very highly. there's a lot of really rotten manga out there, really stupid, childish stuff, but Rosario and Vampire is a good one. There was an anime made out of it, but it's not quite as good. It's still fun to watch.
Rosario and Vampire?
Yeah.
Is that okay?
Or in Japanese, Rosario to Vampire. Although they have their own word for a vampire, Kyuketsuki, they also have adopted the English word of vampire with a B. There's now a Japanese word.
Do you read the classics, and if so, what have you learned from reading them? How does it affect your writing?
Bram Stoker, of course, when we talk about vampires. Dracula is an amazing novel, although it has an archaic feel to it to a lot of the audience nowadays, especially if they're looking at the original 19th century novel. When it was written, he tried to make it as absolutely cutting edge as he could. The vampire hunters in Stoker's Dracula use all the cutting edge technology of the time, including photography and voice recordings on plastic discs and cylinders. And even sciences which have since been discredited, like the science of trying to find criminal subtypes in the human population. Mina Harker, discussing the criminal, says at one point, the Count is a criminal and of a criminal type. And she even refers to one of the famous authorities on that type of thing. I don't remember the guy's name. Mom, you might know. He was a 19th century Italian criminologist, Lombroso, Cesare Lombroso, who thought that humans could be subdivided into different types, and there was a criminal genetic type, although he probably wouldn't have used the word genetic.
There's a lot of discussion recently about what they call the Pittsburgh style of writing and the arts, which has been influenced, of course, by George Romero. In film, of course, they call Pittsburgh the zombie capital of the world, but there's a lot of discussion that this Pittsburgh style of the macabre and fantasy is basically its own genre unique to Pittsburgh. What would you have to say about that, and what do you think of the influences of the local writers groups on that?
There have been a lot of famous writers in Pittsburgh. Willa Cather comes to mind. She lived here for a while. I think that of the Pittsburgh science fiction writers I've seen, a lot of them do tend to set works in Pittsburgh. Kara Dalkey wrote one of her fantasies set in Pittsburgh, and the Steelworkers myth, Joe Magarac shows up as a character in that. John DeChancy has several of his castle novels, and apparently the route to the alternate world where the castle exists is through the basement of the U.S. Steel Building.
Gwen Spencer, too.
Yes, Gwen Spencer has written books set in Pittsburgh, although I don't think she's living here anymore.
Yes.
And I tend to use Pittsburgh a lot. The Celibate Succubus takes place partly in Hell, but also in Moon Township and Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh is...
What is the comparison between Hell and Hell?
Well, as Elliot pointed out, Pittsburgh is the zombie capital of the world because of the George Romero films and the zombie events that are held here every year. And not just because of the city council.
Well, getting back to you mentioned Bram Stoker and Dracula. I always, my opinion was, and just, of course I haven't, it's been years since I read either book or saw the movies, but I always thought that the Stoker novel still holds up pretty well today, but the Frankenstein novel, to me anyway, seems kind of a little bit dated. But it's just the flip for the movies. I think that the Frankenstein movie with Karloff still holds up pretty well, but the Lugosi movie is kind of a little bit cornball. That's my opinion, But it's just...
Yes, Lugosi is an icon for his playing Dracula, but if you actually watch the film, the ending is kind of just peters out.
Yeah.
The climactic scene of the book where they're attacking Dracula and Quincy stabs him with a Bowie knife. In the film becomes a bunch of people stalking through a big room under an abbey, and they find a coffin in the background, and they do something in it.
Yeah, that's it. Right, I know. Yeah, that's what I thought too.
They had a more dramatic ending in Nosferatu, which of course was based on Dracula, although they tried to file off all the serial numbers. They got sued anyway. Many of the prints were destroyed, unfortunately, although they're finding some still.
Still yet to see that.
Can you talk a bit about Rickert and Beagle Books, which was kind enough to host this event today?
This is Rickert and Beagle Books. It used to be LJ's. The Beagle in the title is Peter S. Beagle, author of The Last Unicorn and A Fine and Private Place, and not to mention the autobiographical novel I See by My Outfit. And Ms. Rickert is sitting behind the counter there, and probably responsible for much of the decor here. This place is a major center of Pittsburgh fandom, and a really good source of fantasy, horror, and science fiction, plus a fair scattering of nonfiction and other genres.
Can you tell us a bit about your store and support for local writers?
Oh, absolutely. Well, the store started as LJ's Books over 17 years ago with my two partners, Frank and Louise. About 3 years ago, they brought me in as a co-owner, and then promptly decided to retire, leaving me the entire store. So I called my friend Peter and said, "Hey, Peter, let's own a bookstore together." So this is mine and Peter's project now. I carry easily 50, 60 local authors, primarily science fiction, fantasy, horror, and poetry authors, but I do look for authors in all genres that are writing locally, small press authors writing elsewhere in the country who are not being picked up by the big chain bookstores who feed into my customers' interests, art from local artists, and I try to host a different signing here every weekend if I can.
Can you tell us a bit about your location and what you like about being in Dormont?
Oh yeah, Dormont is fantastic. Aside from the benefit of just being a little bit outside the city, so it's slightly less hectic. Compared to some places, Dormont doesn't have great parking, but compared to Southside, where we came from, it's phenomenal. And as my ex-partner Frank was famous for saying, Dormont is the place where the hipsters come to raise their kids. So a lot of the customers that shopped at LJ's in Southside for 15 years came out here right around the same time that we did, and now they're coming in with their kids and going, "Oh, you moved here too." So we seem to have followed our clients out here.
Say something about Word.
Oh yeah, the Word Writers Group, which is organized through Parsec, meets here 2 Tuesdays a month, every month. Their next meeting will be the 26th. They meet from 6:45 to 9 p.m. with a rotating cast of characters and often snacks.
Word stands for Write or Die.
Mm-hmm. They critique each other's work, discuss writing, writers that they like or don't like, different styles, things like that.
Write or Die is one of the 3 major writers groups in Pittsburgh. I've seen it mentioned on Wikipedia. Can you tell me a little more about it? How it got started? And
actually, no, because I'm not a member. I just host the meetings. They've been meeting for
Okay.
far longer than they've been meeting here.
Are you a Word member?
No.
Southbridge?
Well, what Southbridge is pretty much done.
Ah.
I gave a presentation to a word meeting here once.
Anybody here a Word on it?
That I have
no history. Ah, okay.
Now, you said that your character is smarter than the average person. What is that like to write someone who is highly intelligent or even more intelligent than yourself as a writer? How do you write a character that is super genius or whatever?
It's difficult. I have to give her a lot of skills I don't have, and that means I have to be very careful about writing the scenes. It doesn't necessarily mean that she's wise. Yeah. She doesn't necessarily make good decisions, but she can analyze things very well.
Okay.
Elliot and I did a humor thing once involving something called the U.S. Army Physics Corps, U.S. Army Physics School, and their motto was, "Just because I'm a genius doesn't mean I'm stupid."
only to find out later that there really was a U.S. Army Physics School.
Physics. Figures. I may be smart, but I ain't no fool. I'm a U.S. Army Physics School.